Hi, John McCarty here with Odyssey Test Prep. I'm joined by Ian Holmes, one of our fantastic tutors. He's got I think it's 100% five-star review rate, and we're going to talk a little bit about what really great tutoring looks like, as well as how he got into Stanford. So Ian, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start off with a little bit of, tell us a little bit about your journey with the LSAT and, how you ended up getting into Stanford.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll step it on back then. So when I was looking at applying for undergrad, I was really set on the sciences and wanted to be an engineer. And so I ultimately ended up applying and getting into Stanford, which I can talk a little bit about that in more detail too. But I actually ended up studying computer science while I was there. And so I graduated with a degree in CS back in 2015, and then went in to work in big tech in the San Francisco Bay Area thereafter. And so during college, I met my now wife, and she also was working in tech, but had some, I guess, interest in potentially law school someday. Similarly, I had kind of thought about an advanced degree sometime, but it could have been an MBA. It could have been looking at law school. But I knew that I liked engineering and software development, and so that's where I decided I wanted to start off. And so, excuse me. So anyway, a few years after graduation, my wife and I decided to or my then girlfriend, now wife, and I decided to get married. And so we moved from Bay Area to Texas, where her family was. And I was still working for a big tech company, and she was still doing tech consulting. And then when the pandemic hit, that was really the impetus where she decided that she wanted to make a career change and start thinking about law school. And so I thought that was really excellent, and I definitely supported her in that endeavor, but I didn't necessarily feel like that's what I wanted as well, really until kind of as we're coming out of the pandemic. She had applied and gotten into George Washington University here in Washington, D.C., Yep. And so we loaded up our young family with our then 1.5-year-old son, who's now 3 going on 4, and moved with our 2 dogs from our Texas house into our DC condo. And so she is now a 3L student at GW, and has been doing really well for herself with internships and externships at NOAA, at the DOJ. She interned for Earth Justice this past semester, and is now in the process of full-time job applications. Awesome. And so it was around her late 1L, early 2L that I thought, I had always had this sense that maybe I wanted to do law. My uncle was a lawyer in Kentucky, where I'm originally from, and I had really enjoyed hearing some of his stories. But if you ask my wife why she decided to go ahead and make the switch to become a lawyer, she'll tell you about a literal dream she had about representing underprivileged populations. Yeah. And I didn't have quite that level of conviction until I got to see her have these experiences with some of the agencies, like I mentioned. And her friends through law school became my friends, and I got to see the experiences they were having as well. And really with that sort of secondhand experience, but I was on the front lines to see exactly what their experiences were shaping up to be and what opportunities there were, and realized at the same time that I'd kind of, reached, I'd accomplished what I felt like I'd set out to accomplish with computer programming, and was really ready to embark on a career that stayed, I think, hewed a little bit closer to my values of wanting to serve, underrepresented populations and fight for justice. And so that's where I began my process of applying for the LSAT, and then thinking about what starting into law school will look like. So in that regard, I did not know, I think this will be relevant for a lot of your listeners, I didn't really know where to get started with the LSAT prep. Yeah. So way back in late 2020 or early 2021, when my wife was taking initial diagnostic LSAT. I sat down with her and took the same one as well because it seemed like a fun Friday night. And
Sure.
so both of us, I forget the exact score, but it was something in the 140s where it was not particularly distinguished, but we did our best and didn't know what we didn't know. And so she decided to sign up for an online course through a different provider. I hadn't learned about Odyssey until recently. And so when it came time for me to be signing up for some sort of LSAT prep, I actually initially tried to do it straight out of some prep books. And I very quickly found that wasn't going to be going to be sufficient for getting to the level that I wanted to achieve. And so I ended up also signing up for the same prep course that she had done, just as a self-directed online. Part of that was I was still working at the time. And so I thought, okay, I don't know that I can commit to a regular time multiple times a week. But I also just wasn't sure again of what I didn't know. And so I took that course and I did find success with it and ultimately got my 99th percentile score, which I'm very excited about. Just as some background, now as being a prospective law school applicant, I'm in a position where I'm very much a splitter. I had a decent undergraduate GPA, but not something that is likely to get me into many of the top schools. And so having the high LSAT was going to be necessary for me to have a decent shot at some of the schools that I'm aspiring to. And so, excuse me, once I got that high score, I had, I guess backing up, I had decided to step away from software engineering early in 2020, or I guess late 2023. So going on a year ago now. In order to really put nose to the grindstone for studying for the LSAT. And so with that, I also realized I would be looking at a 2025 application cycle or matriculation. And so that was where I realized I was sitting with about a year of a gap in between the job I had been doing and beginning law school, and that I needed to find something to do in the meantime as well. And so that's when my wife actually again suggested, well, you have the score where you can apply to some of these LSAT prep companies. Why don't you give tutoring a try? So that's how I got started with Odyssey. And so to date, I know you mentioned I'm very proud of having a perfect 5-star rating from my students who leave reviews up for Odyssey. Just mainly to feed my own ego. I checked the other day and I believe I am the most rated of active tutors. But John may be able to confirm or deny that.
Essentially, I'll have to look into the stats on that for sure.
I'd be very curious to know, but I am very, very proud of my students. I've had every single one has seen improvement since working with me. And it's entirely their work and effort that goes into it, so they deserve all the credit. But I'm just honored to be a part of their preparation and to help them, figure out where their shortcomings are and, how to learn the techniques that are necessary for certain types of questions or different sections in order to help them make their strides forward. So I know that I have one student, really the first example of a student just a couple of months ago, where she had come to me and had a goal score of a 155. I think her best to date had been a 152. And then I think maybe it was the third practice test after I was working with her. So it had been 7 or 8 sessions that she came back to me with 164 as a practice test.
Wow.
And so she just sat for the October sitting. And so I am eagerly awaiting her test score to see if we have a confirmed, goal met there for her. But seeing the students, making their strides forward, getting to work with a variety of students who are from, areas throughout Central and Eastern time zone and are at various stages of their lives and, career goals, has been really gratifying for me as well. So I'm very excited to see where they're going. They have interests, in everything from criminal law to patent law to public service. And so it's been something that's just very exciting to see all the various reasons that people might want to be taking the LSAT in order to pursue a legal education.
Yeah, for sure. And anytime you can surpass somebody's, stated goal when they come in, like I want a 155 and now they're at a 164, that always feels really great. So we had a recent student who was working with another tutor, and she had spent quite a bit of time with her and realized that maybe she wasn't the right fit, and then switched over to working with you. And then she found that it was really a situation that she was super excited about. And just a little background on how we match tutors to students. So the students will come into us. I'll usually have a conversation with them. If not, one of our senior level staff members will have a conversation with the student. We'll figure out where are your strengths, where are your weaknesses, what's your communication style like, what's your learning style like, where are you at, what are your goals, what was your starting point. So we try to gather all this data that we possibly can in an initial conversation with the student. And then, of course, we know all the tutors that we have on staff, and we try to make that match really well from the student to tutor perspective. And we do guarantee we get them to the right person. Every once in a while we miss, and in this case, we missed that first shot. But on the second assignment, we were able to get her over to you, and she has been just, I don't want to say like relieved, but just like really excited about the prospect of working with you and how that connection is, and that fit is just like super perfect. So walk us through a little bit about what your process looks like when a student comes to you initially. What happens then?
Yeah. So in the first, so I'll get matched up with a student through Odyssey, and the first thing I get is an email that has whatever information that they've provided. So it's what their current actual or test score that they're sitting at is, their goal score if they have one that's well defined. And then information about what prior LSAT prep materials they've used, if any. And so my default is to, send them an introductory email and to ask them to tell me a little bit about their goals for, why the LSAT, and what their eventual goals are to the degree that they might have that set in stone. Yeah. And so from there, I usually suggest that the first thing that they bring to our initial session is a recent practice test or a recent drill section that they've done. Just something that we can start to look over some of the questions that they've answered, or hopefully a reading comp and a logical reasoning section, to see what their strengths are and where they've tended to miss. A lot of students have some issues early on with timing, which is, I think, really mostly to do with needing to get a holistic understanding of each of the question types, because as you understand what you're looking at, it feels like it becomes easier, but the timing issues tend to become less dire after you become more familiar. And so my default is definitely to use the Odyssey books and to teach from them as the curriculum, and essentially go through the lessons the way they're laid out, which now, John, you wrote these books, and so you might be able to confirm for me. It appears to me that the logical reasoning book is laid out with the most common, or maybe I should say, I know that the must be true questions are the most common question type. And so that's right there in lesson 1. I'm also guessing that's probably because it's a very good place to start with talking about what a premise is, what an intermediate conclusion is, what a main conclusion is. And so I can really start from basics with the students when we're looking at that.
And that is kind of how the books are built, are more so what are the most fundamental building blocks that we could possibly have, and put those at the outset. And a lot of those are the most tested question types too, because the test makers want to make sure you have those fundamentals down. But yeah, like must be true, main conclusion, working your way through like that, where you can really start to kind of like, if you get thrown right into, let's say, necessary assumption, required assumption questions, you may not have the skill set to be able to conquer those yet if you can't find what the conclusion is, and you don't know like what the must be true criteria looks like, and how arguments are built, and what premises are, and all this other
Exactly. I mean, that's why I appreciate, lesson 2 main conclusions. And with those, you're either filling in a blank, or it'll say, what is the main conclusion? And it will be stated there directly in the question. Now, they may use some sort of LSAT trickery to kind of hide or obfuscate exactly what the conclusion is. So they'll make some statement, say, this is not true. And that's the main conclusion. And so you'll get a restatement of that in the answer choice. But I appreciate how that's a skill that is directly in lesson 2, because finding what the main conclusion is becomes a necessary step when you're tackling so many of the other question types.
Yeah.
So I guess backing up to my general approach with new students is if I know that a student is coming to us where they have an LSAT that's maybe planned for 3 or 4 months down the line, so we have a lot of opportunity to work through the curriculum and really take our time with every question type, I will go straight through, starting from lesson 1, and teach in order. And also similarly with the reading comprehension, I'll start off by teaching the Odyssey reading comp approach. And then the later chapters, talk about specific question types. And the approach to one passage or another doesn't necessarily change greatly, but I do appreciate how the book is organized such that if you're working on organization of test questions, I think it's lesson 4, you have passages where you know that you have questions about that, so you can test specifically on that concept. So with a typical student, I will use the books as my guide for curriculum. As we're working through, it'll often become apparent where they need a little bit more focus on perhaps strength and weaken questions and identifying, causal relationships. And so that may be where we try to focus some extra drills in, or assign an extra homework section from that lesson. Sometimes I have a student come to me where I remember my first student that came to me that had a goal score of 175. And they said they were currently sitting at, I think, a 171 or a 172. And I was thinking, oh boy, like they're not far off from this. And that's up at the very upper echelon where you have to be very on your game in order to be able to get, a high 170 score. And so, with that student, he had a number of very specific, question types that he really wanted to focus in on. And so that was a different tact for me to take, is I needed to, also make sure that we tried some of the question types from lessons 1 and 2, just to make sure that we had, the fundamentals that we needed. But coming in with something that's already cracked 170, I know that many of his basic skills are perfectly good. Yeah. And so that's where, if I have a student that has specific requests, and they come to me, or in their introductory email, they say, I really need to work on flaw questions. I know that we'll definitely touch on the other types just to make sure that we're on the same page, or maybe there's some technique that just hasn't been articulated to them, and maybe somewhere that I can help. But I focus in very much on what the student is requesting of me then, and really try to tailor, each of our sessions to their needs.
Yeah. And then do you go through like a diagnostic process with their practice tests? Because I found a lot of times students have some stated needs and then some unknown needs where they don't really know that there's these issues, because, most of us have, like, you can't really see our own issues very clearly, because if we could, we would fix them more readily, right? Yeah,
definitely. And so in some cases, they'll have come to me and say, hey, I put my test through, something like 7 Sage, or perhaps I know that Odyssey's website has where you can upload your test answers as well to get a breakdown by question type. And so sometimes I'll call to their attention to say, you missed, maybe you did very well, and we only had a dozen questions missed on this practice test, but 5 of them were actually required assumption. Had you noticed that seemed to be a place that we could focus? And sometimes they'll say, actually, yeah, I was surprised to see that, or really? And so it means that we can then, identify an area of focus in order to try to shore up that as a strength moving forward. One of my proudest moments so far with tutoring is I have an awesome student who is, I'm sad because when you're in this job, that you're in business to go out of business, because as soon as your students, hit their goals, if I have a student that came back with a 179, they probably are really beyond where I can help them a great deal more. Sure. And they've got all the tools that I've handed them with. So it is bittersweet to, I'm wrapping up with the very first student I was assigned. Her final session will be here just before the November test. And so it's bittersweet, but it's also exciting because there's, a constant supply of of eager and talented and intelligent students to work with. But one of them that I was mentioning, I was really proud where she had told me that, initially she really dreaded reading comprehension, and it was just not a strong suit for her. And that within a couple of sessions of working through the approach that's, detailed in the Odyssey books and just giving some of my expertise as well, we helped her, learn the strategy for approaching it, where she said, now it's my strongest section. And the last 3 practice tests she's taken from me, she's missed exactly 1 reading comp question every single time. Wow. And I'm just, amazed to see that turnaround where it had been, slightly, basically on par with, but maybe slightly less performant than her logical reasoning. And now it's such a strong strength for her. So I'm very excited. I am very confident that she'll be hitting her goal score here in November. And so we will see how that turns out for her. But it's just it's really a great feeling when you can, find a student, help identify their needs, and then see them through to success.
Yeah, for sure. Especially something that they're really struggling with. They think it's a weakness. I have always loved when students come in and say, oh, I'm not a great test taker. I've never done really great on standardized tests. And maybe they've only taken the SATs before, right? And you're like, okay, well, this is a really good opportunity to change that around. And then by the end of it, they score like a 174. They're like, well, I guess I have to redefine who I am as a test taker through this process. And that is like an amazing transformation.
I think one thing that a myth that maybe I want to dispel a little bit of is this idea that if you start off with a mediocre LSAT score, that it's not possible to get all the way up to a truly exemplary score. It was sort of stated to me that, like, maybe the best you could ever hope for was like a 20-point gain or something like that. And I really do think that this test can be learned. I think that private tutoring or online classes can be a really great tool for a great number of students. Yeah. And, personally, I went from my initial diagnostic was either a 146 or 147. And then I eventually did get up to a 174, which, like I mentioned before, is a 99th percentile. Yeah. And so, that's something that is definitely possible for every student I've had come through. I've had people that say, yeah, I'm just not that great at standardized testing, but I just want to do good enough. And maybe they've set, a modest goal for themselves in the beginning. They take a practice test and suddenly they're 5 points over that. And you can just kind of like see when I'm stepping through it with them, how they reanalyze what their expectations of themselves should be and start to really see the potentials and just the wonderful implications that can have for where they're likely to get accepted, what scholarships they might be able to expect with those acceptances to various law schools, and really wherever they want to take their legal studies or legal career in the future too.
Yeah, for sure. And there was something else you mentioned earlier that I wanted to call out too. You said, all right, we were working some of the techniques in the Odyssey books plus some techniques that I had brought in. I think people may not really understand how our books were designed, but our books were designed to give our tutors a resource to be able to kind of have some structure within their sessions. But we 100% expect our tutors to bring in their own expertise and their own knowledge, and to, like, if this technique isn't working, we need to switch over to a different technique or a different perspective, or shine a different light on it. And that's where I think tutoring really shines for people, is you get this really holistic view of the test.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And they are really great resources. And there's some, there's various techniques that even I like to teach what I know is deemed, at least in a couple of resources, the like 3 + 1/2 technique for reading comp. And so that's where, if you're in a position where that you've maybe gotten generally quite good, but you still invariably have one passage left in your reading comp, and instead of having 6 or 7 minutes for it, you've got like 3 minutes. It really is just a technique to help you do better than guessing. And so I'll teach that with a student. And even where that's not something that necessarily is going to be, the preferred approach or the long-term approach, that ultimately, if they're sitting for the LSAT in a week and they don't really have time to do the level of work and to get the familiarity that it takes to know that they're going to be perfectly fine on time, it's something I can do that at least helps them pick up that extra point or two. And so, yeah, there's all sorts of techniques like that that I know that I and that other tutors are, that Odyssey gives us kind of free reign to take the best approach with each student as they come to us and whatever their specific needs are.
Yeah, and like very similar to in logical reasoning. Sometimes I've told students, like, all right, just if you see a parallel reasoning question, it's pretty easy to identify. It's the huge one that looks like a read and comp passage. If someone's like really struggling on time and the test is next week, it's like, all right, well, let's skip those and then let's come back to those at the end where you have a little bit of time, especially if they're usually in that case, they're pretty inconsistent with parallel questions because they are so big and bulky and they take some time. But it's not the ideal approach, right? We would really rather have a few more weeks to be able to go through, dial that in, make sure that they have the skill set that they need and that they're able to conquer everything in the order that you get it. But sometimes it's not realistic. And then we got to give them alternate techniques that they're able to use.
Exactly. That's another really good example for sure. Just, helping them realize how to approach the test, like, so that they suit their strengths to what they're looking at.
Yeah. For sure. And, that customization is, I think, what has brought students to really appreciate your style. You have some structure there with the books, but you're customizing throughout. If you have a student who's got a few months, we're going straight through the material and making sure you know everything. If it's, a few weeks away and they only need a few points, let's double check everything, but let's dive in on those areas where you really have those weaknesses. I think that's fantastic. So any parting advice for students who are currently studying for the test?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're currently studying, I think that the best advice that I can give for how to really get your personal best score is to actually not overlook the importance of a good night's sleep, not just the night before, but in general. Day of, make sure you eat a good breakfast and give yourself that extra time when you're getting to your whether that's setting up at your kitchen table or going into a testing center. Just, if you can go by the previous day just to see what the address is and what the lay of the land is, taking away those stresses from test day really does make a very distinct difference. And so in a large part, I could definitely talk about, the importance of regular study and regimented practice. But I think that that's something that maybe doesn't get touched on enough, are these other elements that you can take in order to reduce stress and give yourself the best, chance that the day of. And then, as always, I would say to be open to all the different resources that are available to you as a test taker. There's so many really good, LSAT prep programs out there, and I would definitely say that you should. I would also give some thought about whether online or in-person tutoring could be something that would be helpful to you, just because it may not even be the primary technique that you utilize, but it might help you actually unlock some areas of focus or some specific techniques that could really pay large dividends as well. So just being curious and kind of taking a look at what the landscape is in order to see what would work best for you.
For sure. Yeah, test day is going to be stressful. Do everything you can to minimize stress. I definitely agree with that. And also the study process is stressful. So if you can have someone there by your side who's helping you unlock things as you go, whether you do that the whole time or just towards the end or somewhere in the beginning when you feel like you've plateaued. And I would touch again, on one other point that you made, that people say all sorts of crazy stuff about the LSAT. You can only go up 10 points, or you can only go up 20 points, or, but we've seen people go up over 40 points on the test, from the 120s to the 170s. We see people go from the 130s to the 170s all the time. Same with 140s and certainly 150s, 160s. So, don't set your own limiting beliefs around what other people's limiting beliefs are. If you put in the work like Ian, starting in the mid 140s, mid to high 140s is a pretty common starting point. But you ended at a very elite area in that top 1%. So congratulations on that. And I've really appreciated talking with you, and I hope to do so again soon.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Thank you again for having me on. It's been a treat.
Thanks, Ian. Have a great day.